In 2024, when we sat down here at TPM, we were talking about the introduction of the category container lifecycle management. In the intervening years, AI has expanded possibilities across the industry. When you look at your particular position in the market, what advantages do you think that brings to AI adoption, that conversation?
Our story really hasn't changed. We have always said we're fundamentally a data science company. It was the usefulness of our data and the data sovereignty and the fact that we owned it and originated a lot of it, and more so even now, that unlocked the ability to build sophisticated tooling for our customers to better manage exceptions with the container. That narrative hasn't changed, and nor has it decreased in importance with regards to AI. You have to deal with either public or private data sets, and the fact that we're data first and have our own sovereign data lake, it allows us to not only manage the exceptions in container lifecycle management or whatever subsequent processes need to be executed against, it allows us to expedite that and automate that with AI. So that narrative hasn't changed. In order to have good AI, if there's such a thing, you have to have good data, and good data is primarily private and sovereign data. Obviously, the customer has that with their own data, but Gnosis brings the logistics milestones to the table in a way that we own it and therefore our customers own it.
Let's talk a little bit more about that, the importance of that ownership of data piece and how you help customers see the pros and the cons of different approaches.
I think customers understand their data. This is proprietary, we want to protect it, so that concept isn't that difficult to understand. It may be more difficult in an environment or in a space like we are, oftentimes being categorized as a visibility provider. We've often said we're not an aggregator. We don't just pass milestones one-to-one or regurgitate them one-to-one. We've always run it through our own proprietary data hierarchy and put the data in its most usable format with our own intelligence. We've recently made more of a push to be an originator of a lot of that data set. We're not the originator or the owner of all of the data, but we've certainly made a push, probably more specifically into the ocean terminal space, of being the originators of things like container availability and the subsequent last free day, which is like an actual paradigm shift in our industry. Whereas everybody was measuring somebody else's data, for the first time, somebody that could be considered a visibility provider is now originating that data, and other people would have to measure it against us. So one, there's a time component. When you're the originator, there's no latency, and that's typically the key that picks the lock with something that's operational grade, built for people that are working in the weeds, as opposed to executive level backwards looking BI tool. And so if you own it and you're the originator, you effectively remove the latency from the equation altogether, and it's beyond real time. That's a key component, and then like what you can do with it or how it will differentiate your customer. If everybody's relying on the same public data sets, they're all ultimately going to converge to the mean, especially if they're using the same AI tooling. It can only learn so much from the same publicly available data. So to have a proprietary data set in the same space combined with our customers' proprietary private data is like the true competitive advantage, and it's only further amplified with something like AI, or more specifically agentic AI.
What's the most misunderstood piece of what you're bringing to the market?
I think any time in any industry that you create a category, like fundamentally you're going to be misunderstood because it is avant-garde. You are creating it from nothing. I think in the early stages of that, people often want to be like, oh, you're just like this or you're just like that. And the way we overcome that is we say we're both. We're visibility plus execution, like a service provider, all in one. Since then, and more recently, is helping our customers in the market understand. I think they understand this, but maybe their bosses, so finance or like the C-suite at a BCO, that yeah, we want to be an inch wide, mile deep in the international space, but that inch wide is still like 6 or 7 different categories that would make up what we would call a one-stop shop operating system. And by operating system, I don't mean like a thinly veiled visibility layer across the top of it. Typically, most international logistics teams, specifically at a BCO, stitch together a few different parts to make up that operating system, whether it's technology providers or service providers or carriers. And so once we help them understand that there is a one-stop shop, but that the depth of that one-stop shop is as deep as it could possibly go, and the people that are actually in the weeds operate in there, they understand that it is an operating system. And unfortunately, a lot of that still lives in Excel spreadsheets and emailing people. So to be able to start bottom up, in the depth of that international space and build it for the folks that are truly in the weeds, that's why I feel that we've created an operating system for international logistics.
On the panel, you also spoke about the concept of cost cutting and how that can be perceived and should be perceived in different ways and from both sides of the coin. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, before you can cut any costs, you need to know like where and which costs do you want to cut. And so for lack of a better phrase, you need visibility into your cost exposure. And I think that's something that we do as well. Again, kind of the split between a logistics team having to like do their day job, which is manage the containers and tell finance about it. In order to drive costs down, you need to know like where you want to place those bets and to what detriment. It's never just cost cutting for the sake of cost cutting. It seems to be like a three-legged stool, the way I think about it, or the way our customers tell me about it, in that you're managing like low cost with service with risk. And I fortunately don't actually think that it's actually black and white in a trade-off. I think if you have the right infrastructure partner, the right technology partner, you can have both and kind of expand that aperture, where it's like I might take a low cost approach to my supply chain. At the same time, I have visibility into the service, into where like that low cost is being applied across my supply chain, probably even better than my service provider themselves and like the SLAs they give us. Then with enough time, you can evaluate that cost exposure and that lack of service to negotiate those back into the contract. Negotiate is probably not even the right word if you do it appropriately. It's truly a partnership. And then you can kind of have both, which is you can have a low-cost strategy if that's your main objective. You can start to pull in some more service as well once you have that visibility into that cost versus service trade-off. And then ultimately, it's a risk question. It's what exactly do I want to outsource versus what do I have the ability to insource? And that, all of those, you can have all of that. Again, if you have the right partner, is where you see logistics teams playing the most on offense. And whether it's saving money on demurrage and detention, auditing invoices, total network redesign, it's the combination of those three things and the lens that you can have all three of those things, but you might not be able to have them immediately. But if you sequence it out in the right way from a top-down strategy perspective, the right leadership that knows that that can be accomplished, and you prioritize the right type of partners to facilitate that, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have all of those things at once. And we're seeing that happen with our customers.
What assumption are you hoping attendees at that panel walk away from the session questioning?
I think it's thematically been relevant, this TPM, is that the status quo is gone. It's not coming back. And to me, it feels like we've forgotten our most precious resource, which is the people. And if you talk to people that have been in the industry, like nobody seems to like really be afraid. They've had to deal with these disruptions, but the status quo in a sense of like the tooling and the frameworks and how we analyze how we do our job, something like diversification, isn't as applicable anymore. But it's like really exciting if you're a true professional in the sense of you get to kind of go back to the drawing board and start from scratch, top down, and like redesign everything. So I would hope that it would answer that assumption, which is it's actually an exciting opportunity. It's an invitation to go back to square one, rethink things, and kind of build your tech stack or your partner stack in a way that will sustain for 10 to 15 more years. And so the idea of diversification was something we talked about on the panel. 10 years ago, diversification was diversify your risk across a handful of ocean carriers. That would limit your exposure, and you would be well taken care of to kind of meet management objectives. Since then, things have changed, and now what the ocean carriers are actually responsible for beyond ocean haulage has changed, but that diversification has expanded as well. Logistics teams are expected to have a supply chain strategy and to diversify across more than just the ocean haulage. And what we're seeing with our customers is not only can they do that, they can manage multiple different supply chains at once. They have flexibility, which is really the ultimate solution to uncertainty. And that's probably the most concrete example of diversification is like, do I have flexibility built into my network, not just capacity or some of the fixed asset constraints, but from a strategy perspective too, and an architecture perspective too. And there's plenty of examples of customers and different commodities that are having to deal with separate macroeconomic constraints. And a lot of their business growth is coming from parts of the market that they're not as familiar with and that they definitely did not design their supply chain to satisfy. If you're a discount retailer and you have a discount retail supply chain, primarily focused on cost, not necessarily service, a little bit of risk, and all of a sudden the growth in your business is coming from the more high-end part of the market, the luxe part of the market, that supply chain architecture or strategy is not going to work, and you're going to risk losing customers or not capturing enough of the market with a different type of customer. But we are seeing, whether it's tires or furniture or appliances, customers that can have multiple different supply chain strategies in real time with the same team and execute those strategies and take care of multiple different types of the market. And that's ultimately what's going to diversify your risk enough in like the whole business picture to sustain through chaotic times like we're in today. It's not just chaotic in the logistics industry, it's chaotic geopolitically, it's chaotic from consumer demand. And every possible scenario is happening all at once.
Michael, thanks so much for taking time to sit down with me today.
Thank you.